Hi, my name is Dr. Josh Gellers, and today I'm going to talk to you about environmental justice. But first, we should distinguish between three related concepts. Equality is the assumption that everyone benefits from the same supports, even though, as you can see from the image, the shorter person, even though they have a support device that could elevate them, they still can't see the game. So even though they're given support, it doesn't allow them to participate on an equal playing field with the other people. Then there's equity. Equity is where everyone gets the supports they need, also known as affirmative action, and this produces equity. So here you can see that the shortest person is given more support than the second or first person, allowing all three of them to see the game. And then finally, justice is where all three people in this example can see the game without supports or accommodations because the structural impediment or the cause of the inequity was addressed. And this way, everyone is able to participate at the same rate without having to accommodate anyone in a disproportionate way. The modern environmental justice movement really kicked off in 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina, where the government had decided to place harmful chemicals in a local landfill in a community that was predominantly African American. This caused numerous protests, hundreds of arrests, and at the end of the day, the government still decided to dispose of these harmful chemicals in this community, despite all of the hand-wringing and all of the protests that occurred. And so this idea that certain classes of individuals, in this case, certain race of people, were disproportionately exposed to potential environmental harms was later the subject of a more comprehensive study in 1987 called Toxic Wastes and Race, which found the following. Race proved to be the most significant among variables tested in association with the location of commercial hazardous waste facilities. This represented a consistent national pattern. So important here is the conclusion that race was strongly tied to the location of hazardous waste facilities, which could present an environmental harm for communities of color. Over time, we've seen this notion evolve because what began as environmental racism, noting the disproportionate impact of environmental harms on communities of color, then evolved into environmental equity, which also added the lenses of gender and social class as other ways in which people could be potentially exposed disproportionately. And then finally, this grew to be known as environmental justice, which has now been seen both in the United States and also in other parts of the world. And it added the concepts of equality and equity that were discussed earlier. So to give you a more robust understanding of how these things relate to each other, I'm going to briefly describe this schematic that I presented in a paper, which you see before you today. So there are, generally speaking, three prongs of environmental justice: distribution, participation, and recognition. Distribution refers to the disproportionate exposure to either environmental goods, like public parks, or environmental bads, like waste incinerators or landfills. Participation refers to the ability of people to meaningfully participate in environmental decision-making processes that affect them. And recognition is this acknowledgement that people cannot be actively discriminated against in the process. For example, if a meeting is held in a local community in which most people speak Spanish and the meeting is conducted entirely in English, one could consider that an affront to the local community and their culture, and thus a harm to their recognition or their status because of their linguistic capabilities or their cultural background. All of these are in some ways affected by this notion of capabilities, which is described by Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum. Capabilities refer to basic human functionings that you might need to have a role in the distribution, participation, or recognition of a particular group. So for example, if someone does not have the capability of being able to read, that is, they are not literate, they might not be able to effectively participate because they can't read signs announcing upcoming government meetings discussing the siting of a new waste treatment facility, for example. So you need to have basic capabilities in order to address these three prongs. And so all of that leads to environmental justice and what I call its cognate forms of justice, which include housing, transportation, climate, energy, and food justice. And importantly, all of these appear under the broader banner of social justice. So to give you an example of this here in Jacksonville, what you can see on this map, which is taken from the EPA's EJ Screen tool, are the visual relationship between locations or facilities that have to disclose under the toxic release inventory that they're releasing harmful chemicals into the atmosphere. And you can see that there are darkened areas of the city which are places where people who are in a lower income bracket exist. So what you can see just by the plain plain eye here is that there appears to be a spatial correlation between lower income places and areas that have a lot of these facilities that have to disclose under the toxic release inventory. So I'll leave you with this closing thought that environmental justice is the key to an equitable and resilient future for all. If you have any questions about this, feel free to utilize my contact information at the top of the slide, and I hope you enjoy this module in Sustainable Living 101.